Hello and welcome to Thursday's episode of a Terrace Scottish Football Podcast. I am your host, Craig Fowler, and this is the first part of a two-parter. In this edition, myself and Craig Telfer. Hello, Craig.
Hello, Craig.
We'll be talking about the first leg of the Premiership playoff final between Raith Rovers and Ross County, which finished up 2-1 to Ross County. And then in the second part, it will be Tony Anderson and Graham Thulis talking about the Scotland squad, the announcement, the video of which starred the man who I am also talking to on this podcast right now, Craig.
Yeah,
before we get to that, I mean, you appearing on the official announcement for the Scotland squad for Euro 2024, is that just a series and a long line of very weird things that have happened to yourself and to us in general over the past few years?
Ah, man, it's what a privilege, what an honour to have been asked for the video, and it was so much fun to film. They'd been filming it over the course of the day. The guy Conor McCord that works for the Scottish FA, he stays a couple of streets over from Hampden. He's been in his house for about 7 or 8 months, so it's still in the process of being done up. So why not shoot a video about a house party in his house? So I got there, they'd been filming over the course of the day. I got there about 5:30, and when I pitched up there, they were filming the scene where Auntie Niemi is lying face down on a carpet and a chicken bobs along. And they had a person there whose job is to provide animals for film and television. And what they did was they put like a little track of pellets down. And so basically let the chicken loose, and the chicken just walked along the front of the frame of the camera, just pecking at these things. I had to do about 4 or 5 takes because chickens aren't the most coordinated of animals. You can't train a chicken like you can train a dog, for instance. But great fun to be a part of, and just it's when you see my involvement in it and just see it all pulled together, knowing what was involved from my end. You know, like, I mean, you've worked in television before, Fowler. You know how these things work. But when you see what you did to what actually finished, I think the guys did an absolutely fantastic job, and I think it's good to see that. You know, the only thing people were complaining about was perhaps Ryan Jackson's involvement in the squad. Everyone was delighted with the video and thought it was really good. So great to have been a part of it, and great to see that it's gone over as well as it has done. Really talented team there at the Scottish FA. Fair play to them. Yeah,
I was a much bigger fan of that than I was the I Am Brew advert, which has been brought out to pop the marks ahead of the tournament. That was I didn't enjoy that.
The accent thing, isn't it? You don't like that?
Oh, it's the professional Glaswegian accent. It's that video is just, you see it so much in media where it's like almost like a Glaswegian accent's idea of somebody who's not from Glasgow and trying very hard to do it. It's like, why don't you just have them talking like people normally talk in Glasgow? You don't have to like put it on so fakely.
Do you know, man, I was getting heat for my accent. I did a video with the Scottish FA a couple of months ago for the 150th anniversary of the first Scottish Cup final. And with it being the Scottish Cup final between Rangers and Celtic this week, they reposted it on their social media, and someone commented underneath it, was like, this guy's accent, how many shares in Brewdog does he have? And I was like, wow, that's... 1, none is the answer, and 2, I can't help the way that I speak. So please.
But that's just your accent, though. They're when they're starting on these things, people actually put on these accents, like they just make themselves. It's like, it reminds me of when I used to PR in Ibiza, and I used to put on more of a Scottish accent to get people's attention.
But I do think you find that if with your accent, if you're in the company of people that aren't Scottish, I think it's an unconscious thing that you become more Scottish when you're doing it.
Anyway, this isn't
a lower league podcast.
It's a Thursday podcast.
You're not Sean McGuigan.
To be fair.
I suppose we are talking about one of Sean McGuigan's teams, though. So to be fair, we are sort of doing things normally.
Yes. Right, let's get to talking about the game from tonight. Because up until the last few minutes of it, it didn't seem like we were going to have much to talk about at all. I was preparing this big speech about how we really underestimated the difference in quality between whoever was going to finish 11th in the Scottish Premiership and whoever we were going to face in the playoff final. And then Raith Rovers finished the game with a flurry, got a goal back into it, and had 3 good chances. Yeah. 2 good chances and 1 kind of half chance in the last few minutes to make this 2-2 going back to County. But we'll pick apart the game in a bit more detail, but I'll just kind of ask for your general thoughts on it to begin with.
I think you summed up very well, Fowler. I think that even had it been St Johnstone, I think from last time Sean McGuigan and I previewed this match, he said he would much prefer to play St Johnstone rather than Ross County because St Johnstone on paper appeared to be the easier side. But regardless of who finished in 11th place, I thought they would have given Raith Rovers a really, really good game here. I think in the SPFL, perhaps a step up between the divisions, I think it might be most pronounced between the Premiership and the Championship. And you saw that particularly during that first half, particularly during the first 15 minutes, when Ross County were just popping the ball around so confidently and Raith Rovers just couldn't get the ball, couldn't get a touch of the ball. I'm sure there was a statistic that came up on screen that Ross County had 29 touches in the final third compared to Raith Rovers, who had 0. And yeah, the first half was very one-sided. It was like a sterile pumping where, other than Jack Baldwin did a nice bit of skill and had a cross-come shot that was saved by Dubrovski's legs, there wasn't really all that much in it. And then at the start of the second half, when Danda got his penalty, Baldwin got his header, you're thinking, this is going to be a really, really difficult task for Raith Rovers to try and salvage anything from this. And it's perhaps something that's dogged Ross County over the course of the season, just a slackness at the back and just a lack of concentration in key areas, switching off. And that ultimately what led Raith Rovers back into the game. They scored an absolutely fabulous goal from San Stanton, could have scored an equaliser courtesy of Josh Mullen if he'd been perhaps a bit more careful with his shooting. But I'm pleased to see that County scored because it does keep things in. Raith Rovers, beg your pardon, please see Raith Rovers scored because it does keep things interesting going into that second leg. Had it finished 2-0, I'd have been very confident that County would have easily been seen over the line. But I'm pleased that's not the case and there still is something to play for on Sunday.
I mean, away goals aren't a thing in anything anymore, but without the away goals in the playoff, then it does just open it up for the fact that Raith just have to win 1-0 up in the Highlands, and they're certainly capable of doing that, and County are certainly capable of throwing this away. I was actually thinking that, like, just before Raith Rovers got back into it, and I was like, to the extent in which they've dominated this game, County should actually be a little bit down on themselves for how they performed in the final third. Yeah. Because they had not so many necessarily chances to score. Dubrovski made a couple of good saves. They had maybe one or two others on the goals and they maybe could have done better, but it was mainly the inability to find that final ball and to create a good chance. Because the way that there was just kind of one-way traffic for so much of the match, they really could have had it completely sewn up, 4-0. On the balance of play, that would not have been an unfair scoreline until the last 15 minutes.
You say that, Fowler, though, but how many clear-cut chances did they actually create?
It was more, they didn't really create clear-cut chances. It was more like getting into very good areas and just not doing anything with it. They certainly had 2 in the first half, maybe even a couple more, where it was very similar to the goal that Raith scored, and the final ball just wasn't there. Yeah,
that's why I described it as a sterile pumping, because they had so much, they had so much of the ball, and they had a lot of it, particularly in key areas. They just didn't really create any chances. And like I say, the only, to think of Kevin Dubrovski's saves that he made, I think Dubrovski was under a lot more pressure in the previous match against Partick Thistle. This game, the chances, the one we mentioned there when Baldwin had a nice feet in the box, I actually think Baldwin meant to cross that. You could obviously, he wasn't one of those ones where it's a player who doesn't expect to ever find himself in that position and just, let's hit this as hard as we can and try to get an angle in it that someone can get a toe in it. Dubrovski did well to get down onto his knees to push it by. But other than that, I think he was largely untested. Couldn't have done anything about either of the goals. And yeah, for all that possession and all the generally good work, I think you're right. The inability to really create something, because as we mentioned earlier, their link-up play was really, really good. I thought that on the whole, Simon Murray had a good game. Jan Danda had a good game. Jan Danda was probably the best player in the park, other than just switching off at
to be fair to him, it is a shocker, but it's a really good run from Matthews on his blind side, and it's a great ball.
Oh.
Even if Danda switched on,
difficult to try and stop that.
Yeah. I think Matthews still might get to the ball first. What might be different is that he might put him under enough pressure that the ball into across the face of goal for Stanton isn't as good, and you shouldn't be giving him that much time and space to do it. But it was still kind of excellent forward play from Raith. It was just kind of hadn't really shown at all to that point. You talk about County's attack, and I just think I mean, I know that for years we become parodies of ourselves when it comes to Eamon Brophy. Like, we talk about loads, talk about much beyond his ability and what he's, or maybe not so much ability, but what he's actually done in the top flight of Scottish football. Other than like 1 or 2 good years at Killie, it's really not been that much.
Yeah.
But I still look at Jordan White in this game, and I mean, yeah, he done his usual and got some kind of flick, like knockdowns, but the movement that County had, there was one moment in particular that really stood out for me. It was one of County's better moves in the first half, where they had like, they built their way up on kind of right centre towards the penalty area with like about 4 really kind of crisp one-touch passing, and then it came to White, and then he tried to make it like a pass out wide, and he just completely fluffed it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, even at this kind of level, playing against a Raith Rovers defence of Ewan Murray and Dylan Corr, you still do not look like a footballer.
I think that's perhaps why I thought that Jordan White might have started, because as Sean and I touched on last week, sorry not to keep referring back to, but when we were previewing this match, that we were talking about the defence and the fact that you had Ross Matthews at right back, Dylan Corr at centre back, you thought that maybe you could bring Jordan White in and just to try and pin Dylan Corr. Anytime a big ball went into the box, White would latch on to Dylan Corr and really give him something to think about. That didn't really happen. And you're right, there was times that where you're seeing Simon Murray and Connor Randall, the ball's been zipped around quite well. And then it just comes to Jordan White and it sort of careers off in a different direction, as if his football boots had been replaced by 50p pieces. You know, you're sort of a real degree of unpredictability there. And unfortunately, that can work well in some instances, but I think that lack of precision might have cost County from taking an extraordinary lead going into the second leg.
Looking a bit more at Raith, I think the most disappointing thing about them, other than that they really didn't show until, like we say, the kind of final flurry in the last 15, didn't really show much of what they've shown all season. And I think, to me, the thing I was focusing on was, like, County are playing with a back three, and if you're going against a team with a back three that might be a bit stronger at you, what you kind of want to do is get in the space but behind the wing backs into the side of the centre halves. And also, that should give you an advantage in terms of stopping their wing backs from influencing the game.
Yeah.
Neither of those things happened at all in the first half. It started to happen at the very start of the second. You had right away, before Ian Murray had even come out, obviously maybe nature called at the very last minute there, before he'd even come out, Sam Stanton had gone down the left and won a corner. And then 2 minutes later, that was when Connolly had his chance, when he got a bit of space on the right. I think it was a bit of a counter-attack, but he still got space behind the wing back to the side of Leak, cut back inside on his left foot and curled it just round the far post. And that was like, this is what we should have been seeing all along. Like, Raith providing enough of a threat down the wings that County's wing backs have to pin back, because first half especially, James Brown well in the game, and I thought George Harmon had a good game overall as well. And that was something they didn't really do enough until the second half, and then until late on. You
saw it, Fowler, in the first half. I thought perhaps the weak link in that County backline, I know that we said that this County backline aren't particularly good, but I didn't think Ryan Leake had a particularly good game here.
He was Raith Rovers' best player in the first half.
He was Raith Rovers' best player in the first half. I mean, it was a simple ball down the line. I'm trying to think who was running onto it. I think it might have been Connolly or Hamilton that was running onto it. It was Connolly that was running onto it. And Leaks about half an hour late and just kicks him really hard in the leg and gets a booking for it. And there was another bit in the first half as well where Leak climbed over the back of someone and it led to a free kick, and it was quite a poorly struck free kick. It was Scott Brown that hit it right off the wall. But when you were isolating Leak and creating the chance and using him as thinking we're going to most likely to get our chances if we try and isolate him, they just didn't quite do that often enough. And I think that's perhaps more to do with the fact that they were persistently on the back foot. I just think that Ross County in that first half were just really, really good. And it reminded me like a cup tie where a confident team from the top flight is taking on a mid-table lower league side. That's what it looked like, particularly in that first half. And I think that just because they were so much on the front foot, that prevented Raith Rovers from really trying to isolate these players and get in between the centre-backs and wing-backs.
Did you think the Raith subs improved them, or was it just a case of getting that goal and then the momentum completely swinging towards them?
I think so. I think it's more of the The latter, right? I think it's more the latter. But you talk about, like, you know, game states, how, and it's a cliche. Cliches are often true for a reason, though. But, you know, goals change games. If all of a sudden you are cruising in a match, then all it takes is somebody switching off a world-class pass from Sean Byrne. That ball into Ross Matthews was absolutely beautiful. And the only time they go like, oh, when I was watching, sitting on my couch. But then so all of a sudden, you could hear it watching it on the television. The crowd suddenly were up for it. The whole energy in Starters Park completely changed. And that can just unlock something, like unlock a valve in a player that gives them an extra little bit of energy to push on. And I think that's what we saw there. And then all of a sudden, when it's Raith Rovers turning the front foot, then you're really seeing County's weaknesses exposed, where defenders aren't winning their headers, defenders are just looking a bit sloppy in the ground. I mean, you saw that when Josh Mullen got in. I just think that Josh Mullen couldn't really steady himself. He was off balance, and he had that shot and he put it past the post. He should have really put it on target and really given Ross Laidlaw something to think about. But I don't think it was anything to do with the substitutions. I think it was more to do with a really good goal, changing the vibe around the ground.
Yeah, that's probably fair. What I'm trying to think. Well, I think the main thing, Raith could just play better. I don't know necessarily how much they have to change for their team for the second leg. Maybe, I mean, they kind of have to. It's a weird one because they're going in there where they're basically like, right, keep it tight for a lot of it, and then go at them. Like keep it 0-0 for as long as possible. You know, try and play the percentages and maybe get something from a set piece, and then go at them the final like 20 or 30 minutes or whatever to try and get something back in it. But you can just feel that Raith could just play a lot better in general. Now, you would expect County that should be capable of playing better, because County are obviously going to be the home team in this one. Mm-hmm. But Don Cowie, while he's done some things that I think have been pretty impressive so far in his reign, his tactics for the match against Rangers, the one that stands out the most, there have been many instances where he does do some weird things. Now, I said like earlier, like I wasn't sure about White starting, but that still makes sense before the game, kind of what you were saying. But he has kind of mixed things up and done things that have really come back to bite County. And if he does something like this for the second leg and Raith play a bit better, then there is an opportunity there, despite the fact that I do still believe in what I said earlier, that we did underestimate that there is more of a gulf in quality. But it's not so much of a golfing quality that there can't be a Raith victory in the second leg. No,
I would like to say that I didn't underestimate a golfing quality. I knew right from the beginning this was going to be a very difficult game for the whoever finished runners-up in the championship, or whoever won the playoff semi-final. This would be a very, very difficult game for them. I think that one of the things I noticed in this match as well, like you look at like Raith Rovers, one of their best players over the course of the season has been Scott Brown. I think there was a period in the first half where he picked up the ball on the left-hand side of his penalty box, looking around for options, and there was 3 County players all within the vicinity of him, all just waiting for him. If you pass it short, we're going to be, what's the expression? You close the passing lanes. Yeah. You don't give him the option, so the only option for him to do is to go long up to Jack Hamilton. And Jack Hamilton, for all his qualities as a football player, well, if you're up against guys like Jack Baldwin and Will Nightingale, big boys who can header the ball, it's not necessarily getting the best use of him. And I think because that County were so switched on in knowing when to press, with which players that had the ball, then they limited Raith Rovers in what they could do. I think that was a frustrating thing, and I think that was something that they lamented on the panel, the halftime panel, particularly James McFadden, who's covered a lot of championship football. I mean, James McFadden covers every single match in Scottish football on the television. They said, give someone else a go, James, please. But he's seen a lot of Raith Rovers, and that was the thing he was annoyed at, particularly at half-time, just saying, I've seen this team, I know they can play better. And you just want a bit more precision in the middle of the park from guys like Brown, guys like Byrne, guys who can dictate games. And I know it's difficult, that's a difficult thing to do, particularly against a much higher calibre of opposition than what you used to be playing. But just do what you're good at doing, and you've got a chance of taking something from this game.
You wonder as well whether the occasion and nerves gets to them, because that's now 2 games in a row at home where they've got the big crowd at Starks Park, and so often in football it's a massive benefit for you, and it certainly was a benefit for them in the final 10 minutes as they were trying to get an equaliser on the night. But sometimes it can just hype you up too much, and then you can't do the simple things right. You can't keep a hold of the ball. You can't make a simple 5-yard pass because there's just too much kind of nervous energy flowing through you. It doesn't mean you're necessarily like quote unquote bottling it or shitting it or whatever. It just means that there's too much at stake for you to know how to kind of handle the occasion.
I suppose I'm thinking who's got more at stake here. It's definitely Ross County. It's definitely the team from the top flight who are at the risk of relegation. They are the team that have got much more at stake. And I was thinking in terms of nervous energy, again, listen to the Chris Sutton on commentary, who, let's be charitable, he doesn't have a clue about Raith Rovers. And he made a joke about, I wrote this down actually, he made a joke about James Brown. That's it. They made a joke. He said, like, James Brown feels good. And just as he got to the punchline, someone in the crowd let off an air horn, so you couldn't hear the punchline quite properly. I did find that quite funny. But he said about Ross County having they were themselves in a position where they wouldn't necessarily want to be in, and they might be the more nervous of the two teams. I didn't think that was the case at all. Like we mentioned there, those first 15 minutes, County just looked right on top of it here. Right, really, really good.
Yeah, I think it's because when you're Raith and it's the home game and you've just got such expectations on it, with County, it's kind of, I can just imagine being a bit more kind of defiant.
I don't know, Fowler. Like, do you really think that? I mean, I'm not going to use Sean McGuine as a barometer for all Raith Rovers supporters, but do you think that Rovers fans would have been confident going into this one because they were playing against a team that were in 11th place?
It's not necessarily to do with confidence. It's more about this is your kind of opportunity. My general point is just sometimes the home crowd and the atmosphere and the intensity works for you because it's your home stadium and the atmosphere spurs you on and gets you to run that little bit harder, move that little bit faster, stay a bit more switched on, etc., etc. But there are other times where you just, like I say, you just can't do. There's just too much pumping through you. You're almost too up for it, kind of thing. And you need to be a bit more cold and calculated. And I mean, a lot of County players went through this last season. That also does count for something. I know that was the kind of what I was going to say when I was thinking about how because a lot of us, certainly in the group chat, I know you and Sean have kind of continually said that there is certainly a golfing quality that you aren't underestimating, because the rest of us, we watch the Premiership teams and we're not watching the teams in the Championship.
Yeah.
And I think a reason why we did is because of last season. Because we forget that over the course of the Premiership playoffs coming back, because I was confused by a stat that Ian Crocker said during the game, and then I realised what it was. He said of the 12 Premiership playoffs, 4 of them have been won by Championship sides. I was like, 4? And then I was like counting them all. I was like, how's there 12? And then I suddenly realised, he's talking about the 2 seasons where it happened in the 90s.
Oh, right.
Then one of them was won by Dundee United. He's included that as well, so that was a 10. But since they came back, there's been 10, and only 3 of them won by lower league teams. One of them was Hibs making a spectacular arse of it, in a way that only Hibs can.
Yeah.
One of them was the Livy Partick Thistle one, which is maybe the best shout for there not being that much of a gap. The other one was Dundee Killie. That was a very strong Dundee team that only really hit its stride towards the end of last season. And I think we underestimated that Thistle team last year, because they were quite crap for a lot of the season. But if you actually look at the constituent parts, once Chris Doolan took over, they were all of a sudden the juggernaut. And you look at the players that left, so even the guys like Kevin Holt and Ross Docherty, they stayed in the Championship, but they're going to be Premiership players next season. Scott Tiffany left and went to the Premiership. There is somebody else that I'm forgetting that went to the Premiership as well. And you have Brian Graham, the best goal scorer in the lower leagues, and guys like Aidan Fitzpatrick. That was a really strong. If you look at the Thistle team now, that over 2 legs probably should have been playing in this Premiership final instead. That's not as good as last year's team. So I think that was just a rare case where it was a side that we weren't expected to be that good that were actually very good. Whereas a lot of times it's like games like Callie against St Johnstone, or Falkirk against Kilmarnock, where you think they look good, and then actually the game's played, and you're like, oh no, there is a golfing quality here.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Fowler. I agree with you. I don't really have much to add to. I think that's a very fair point. It's a very fair point. I just think that there is. We say this a lot on the podcast when people say, and I think when Sean and I reference it, it's about, say, like the SPFL and what's beneath it, Lowland League, Highland League, West of Scotland League, whatever. People say, there are great players that can make the step up. yes, I've no doubt that's the case. But when it's like a collective, there's the teams above you are just fitter, they're just a bit more consistent. They're just better, faster, stronger, a bit quicker in the mind. All these sort of factors. That's why they're top flight footballers compared to like other teams, and that unfortunately is that's where the gap comes from. And sometimes when you try to overcome these things, when it's the team from the Championship taking the team on the Premiership, sometimes you need, like for instance, when Livingston came up against Partick Thistle, that was a Partick Thistle team who had been for the top 6 the season prior. That was a team that had just had an absolutely dreadful season, completely bereft of confidence, coming up against a Livingston team who, playing that up and at them brand of football that sadly left them. These things can happen, but I'd say 80% of the time, the top flight teams are better. And it's very pronounced. And I thought for about 80% of this game, it was very pronounced here as well.
Yes. Right, Craig, I think that'll do us. Thank you very much for joining me.
No, thank you, Craig Fowler. I enjoyed that. We should do this more often.
We really should. Teams for the Premiership and the lower leagues meeting more often, so we've each got something to bring to the table.
Scottish Cup 4th round, I'll see you there. If there's a draw for one of the games, we'll do a special podcast on it.
Hey, we can do it in July. League Cup group stages.
Yes! What a great idea. I'll see you there.